My dad stood up in the middle of New Year's dinner, lifted his glass like he was about to make a toast, and said in a steady, almost casual voice that cut straight through the room, "We are not your nannies anymore." For a moment, no one breathed. My son was sitting beside me, swinging his feet under the table, completely unaware that something inside me had just shifted. The dining room was warm, filled with the smell of roasted vegetables and clove, but my skin went cold along my arms. I looked at my dad, really looked at him, and felt a quiet understanding settle in the space where shock should have been. This was not a slip, not a joke, not frustration bubbling over after a long day. This was a line, and he was drawing it in front of everyone. I glanced at the faces around the table. My mom stared at her plate, the way she always did when she agreed with him but did not want to be the one to say it out loud. My sister Brooke froze mid-bite, eyes darting between us like she was watching the first spark of a fire she hoped would burn quickly. Then my pager vibrated, a low, insistent buzz from inside my coat pocket hanging on a chair nearby. On any other night I would have ignored it, but heart surgeons do not get to ignore pagers. Not even on holidays, not even during the rare stretch of vacation we managed to carve out of a year. I reached for it and saw the code. Emergency cardiac case incoming. The kind that cannot wait. The kind where hesitation means someone's life slips a little further out of reach. I stood and said, "I have to go. I need someone to watch him for a few hours." My voice was calm because it had to be. My son looked up at me, trusting, warm, small. He was healthy, but far too young to be left alone, and my husband was overseas on a work trip. I looked at my dad, then at my mom. 2 or 3 hours. That was all I needed. My dad did not sit down. He lifted his chin and looked at me the way someone looks at a bill they do not want to pay. His voice landed even harder the second time. "We are not your nannies anymore." There was no confusion in the room now, no misunderstanding. The line he had drawn was deliberate, and here is the part that hits differently when I tell it out loud. For 6 years, from 2016 through 2022, I had paid $212,000 toward the mortgage on this very house. Every month, $3,200 left my account. I covered repairs. I covered late fees. I stood as co-signer on the refinancing documents. I signed the lease on the car my dad drove. I made sure this home stayed warm and safe and solid. And in that moment, asking them for a few hours of help felt like asking a stranger to take on a burden they had never agreed to carry. I did not argue. I did not remind him what I had done. I did not list a single dollar or hour or sacrifice. I simply felt something inside me settle into place, like a puzzle piece that had been rattling in the wrong corner for years. I smiled. A small, quiet smile that surprised even me. "You are absolutely right, and I am not your bank either." My mom finally looked up. Her lips parted like she wanted to take the words back, or soften them, or pretend they meant something else. But she said nothing. Brooke lowered her gaze and stayed silent too. No one suggested another option. No one asked if the surgery was serious. No one asked how I would get my son taken care of. They sat in their warm house, surrounded by food I had helped pay for, and offered me nothing. So I stood. I took my son's hand, small and warm and trusting, and I said, "Come on, sweetheart. We have to go." His chair scraped the hardwood softly. He looked around with the wide, uncertain eyes children have when the adults shift tone too quickly. But he followed me without question. We walked through the entryway, past the wall of framed photos, many of which I had paid to have printed and hung. The sound of laughter from the television floated faintly from the den. The kind of background noise that belongs to families who believe everything is fine. I opened the front door. Cold air rushed in. Behind me, no one stood. No one called after me. No one said goodbye, or be safe, or let us know how it goes. It was almost perfect, the silence. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter with one hand while holding my son's hand with the other. The driveway was dusted with frost. The sky split with fireworks from some early celebration in the distance. My pager buzzed again, more urgent this time, each vibration reminding me someone was waiting. someone whose heart was failing, someone whose family might be hoping for my steady hands. I lifted my son into the car seat, buckled him in with the muscle memory of 1,000 rushed mornings, and felt the weight of the moment settle in the space between my ribs. There are moments in every story where people expect shouting, tears, dramatic exits. But some betrayals do not arrive with fire. They arrive with clarity. This was one of those moments. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, I looked back at the house through the windshield, a home I had carried on my back without realizing how heavy it had become. And then I pulled away. The tires crunched softly over the frozen asphalt as we left the neighborhood. My phone lit up with hospital messages as we merged onto the highway. The world outside was sharp and cold, the kind of winter night that makes everything feel almost too honest. My son asked where we were going. To the hospital, I said, and everything is going to be all right. I do not know if he believed me. I do not know if I believed myself. But I said it anyway. Behind us, fireworks cracked open the sky, small bursts of color reflected in the rearview mirror. Ahead of us, the road stretched long and straight, like a line being drawn across everything I thought I understood. If you have ever found yourself standing in a room full of people who claim to love you and still somehow feel completely alone, then you already understand this moment. And if you feel comfortable sharing, tell me where you are listening from or what you are doing during moments like these in your own life. Sometimes knowing we are not the only ones changes everything. As I turned onto the hospital campus and the bright lights cut through the dark, my phone vibrated again, urgent, insistent. I parked, lifted my son into my arms, and walked toward the entrance, the cold air biting at my skin, the weight of truth sitting steady in my chest. That was the night everything began to shift, and I had no idea just how far that shift would go. The cold air clung to my coat as I carried my son across the parking lot, his small arms looped around my neck, his breath warm against my collarbone. Midnight hovered close, that strange hour when a hospital feels like a world suspended between one life and the next. I pushed through the sliding doors, the heat rushing over my face in a way that always felt both comforting and demanding, and the pager at my hip vibrated again, more insistent this time. I shifted my son higher on my hip, dug my phone out with my free hand, and typed the message quickly, each letter landing with the clarity of someone who has run out of room for hesitation. I am being called in. I need help. The message sent. A beat of silence. Then a single word appeared underneath it. Seen. Nothing else, no call, no question. No, we'll figure it out. Just the acknowledgement that he had looked at the screen and put the phone back down. I stared long enough for the reality to register, long enough for the understanding to settle. Silence was not the absence of care. Silence was a deliberate act. My son tugged at the zipper of my coat. Mama, are we late? Not yet, sweetheart. We just have to move fast. I tucked my phone away and approached the check-in desk, my badge already in my hand. The night staff recognized me. At this point, half of them had seen me more than some of my relatives had. The charge nurse, Meredith, looked up with a kind of steady attention that reminded me why I trusted her more than most people. Rough night, she said. That depends on how you define roughness. She gave a sympathetic half smile before her gaze flicked to my son. Called in. Yes, new aneurysm case. No nanny tonight. I need somewhere safe for him for a couple of hours. She did not sigh or look inconvenienced. She simply turned to the nearest admin assistant, a younger guy who always seemed a little overwhelmed, but reliably kind. Can you help Dr. Maris get her son settled in the secured area? She said. He nodded. Of course. The family waiting room is empty, and the playroom is cleared. Badge access only. Cameras. I will stay nearby until the volunteer arrives. My son pressed his face deeper into my shoulder at the sight of the unfamiliar hallway. I lowered myself to one knee, letting him feel the steadiness of my hands as I brushed hair off his forehead. Remember your coloring book? And your snacks are in your bag. I will be back soon. Very soon. He nodded, but his lower lip trembled just enough to pierce something tender in me. But this was not a moment that allowed softness. Motherhood and medicine overlap sometimes. Other times, they collide so sharply you can feel the fracture inside your chest. Ellen, the volunteer on duty, stepped toward us with a warm smile. She had the gentle presence of someone who once soothed classrooms full of children. He slipped his hand into hers, uncertain but trusting. He looked back only once as they walked toward the glass-enclosed play area. That single glance carried more weight than any word my dad had not sent. I pulled in a steadying breath and headed toward the surgical elevators. My shoes clicked sharply across the polished floor, echoing in the kind of quiet that hospitals hold only at night. Behind me, a code announcement sounded faintly, following by the soft squeak of a gurney wheel. Inside the elevator, I pulled out my phone again. Still nothing. No text. No call. No acknowledgement that his grandson was now spending New Year's night in a hospital playroom because I had nowhere else to take him. Just that same single word beneath my message. Seen. When the door opened, the hospital smell hit me with its familiar blend of antiseptic, warm air, and faint plastic. I swiped into the locker room, peeled off my coat, and scrubbed my hands with a focus that bordered on meditative. The rhythm of it, the repetition, steadied me in a way nothing else could. By the time I stepped into the operating suite, the room was humming with quiet precision. Machines blinked. The anesthesiologist murmured numbers to a nurse. The ventilator whooshed softly. It always reminded me of a symphony warming up, each instrument testing its voice before the conductor stepped in. The patient had already been brought in, a middle-aged man with an aneurysm ready to rupture. His blood pressure was erratic. His oxygen saturation dipped and recovered like a tide with a mind of its own. A case like this does not wait for emotional clarity or family support or the luxury of steady ground. It moves on its own timeline. I stepped into my position, gloved and prepped. The overhead light cast a focused halo over the surgical field. Everything narrowed. Time in an OR bends. It folds and stretches until it becomes something unrecognizable from the clock, ticking on the wall. My whole world became a pulse, a pressure reading, a series of steps that had no margin for hesitation. At one point, the anesthesiologist murmured, "Pressure stabilizing." At another, the scrub tech placed a clamp into my hand with the smooth confidence of long practice. At several points, my mind attempted to drift toward a cold driveway, a family dinner, a message-marked scene. But the work did not allow drifting. It demanded everything. And so I gave everything until the final suture was tied and the aneurysm was no longer a threat. "Good work, doctor," the anesthesiologist said softly. I nodded once, peeled off my gloves, and stepped away from the table. My muscles loosened as the adrenaline eased. Fatigue swept in quickly, followed by hunger that felt sharp enough to ache. But all of it took a back seat to the single question pulsing through me. My son. I walked through the hallway, the hum of vending machines offering a contrast to the sterile quiet of the surgical floor. The break room still held a half-empty tray of cookies someone had brought for them. New Year shift. A paper sign above it read, "Happy New Year," in slanted handwriting. The world outside had celebrated a holiday while I worked. When I reached the play area, I saw him immediately, curled on a navy beanbag, his small body tucked into a blanket. His chest rose and fell in steady waves. Ellen looked up from her paperback and smiled. "He did great," she whispered, "out like a light an hour ago. Thank you, really." I lifted him gently, tucking the blanket around him before settling him against my shoulder. He barely stirred, just sighed and burrowed closer. I carried him through the quiet corridor until we reached the lobby. The automatic doors opened every few minutes as someone entered or left, sweeping cold air across the tiled floor. A janitor pushed his cart, humming something soft and unrecognizable. An orderly wheeled a patient past with practiced ease. I stopped near the exit and pulled out my phone again. Still, nothing. There was something almost startling about how unsurprising it felt. A silence I had expected even before I sent the message. My dad had read my words. He had understood the situation. A daughter needing 2 hours of emergency help. A grandson who had never asked anything of them. A night when I had been on call, not by choice but by obligation, and he had decided to say nothing. The clarity of that choice was sharper than anger. It was almost clean. Outside, fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. The first morning of the new year was beginning to shrug itself into being. I tightened my hold on my son, opened the car door, and settled him into his seat. He didn't wake. His hand curled instinctively around the edge of his blanket as I clicked the buckle. For a moment, I stood beside the car, the cold biting into my skin. My breath came out in a pale cloud. The hospital loomed behind me, warm light against the deep blue dark. I looked down at my phone one last time. One notification. Not from my dad, not from my mom. A hospital alert from a system I had already logged out of, but the message above it remained unchanged. Seen. That single word held all the truth I needed. They saw. They understood, and they chose not to answer. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door softly, and started the engine. The heater clicked on, blowing lukewarm air across the windshield. Some truths do not arrive as declarations. They do not shout. They do not slam into you with dramatic force. Some truths arrive quietly, in the spaces where someone refuses to show up, in the silence where their presence should have been, in the simple, unmistakable absence of care. And as I shifted into reverse, watching the white lines guide me out of the lot, I felt that truth settle into place with the same certainty I felt in an operating room when a heartbeat finally steadies. They had chosen their silence, and whether they knew it or not, that choice was the beginning of everything that came next. The house was still dark when I carried my son inside, his head resting heavily against my shoulder, the softness of sleep making him lighter and heavier at the same time. I tucked him into bed without waking him, smoothed the hair off his forehead, and closed his door with a quiet click. Then I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and let the silence settle. Morning light crept in slowly, a dull gray wash across the counter. My body felt hollow from the long surgery, from the adrenaline that had carried me through the night and then left me drained. I sat down, letting my shoulders fall, letting my mind catch up with itself. I should have slept. Instead, I reached for my phone. There were no missed calls, no texts, not from my dad, not from my mom, not from anyone who had been at that dinner table less than 12 hours earlier. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, thumb hovering over apps out of habit. It felt almost mechanical when I opened social media, scrolling without intention until something bright caught my eye. A video story playing automatically, music, Brooke's voice in the background, and then the image. Her dog, a caramel-colored mix with a bow tied around its neck, perched on a grooming table, freshly brushed, nails trimmed. The caption floating across the screen read, "Best dog grandparents ever." My chest tightened, but not in the sharp way anger hits. This was different, a slow constriction, steady and cold. The next slide appeared. My dad is holding the leash, my mom adjusting the little bow, both smiling, both looking relaxed and proud, standing in the bright lobby of what was unmistakably a grooming spa in Ridgewood. The timestamp read 9:23 in the morning, which meant while I was preparing a patient for anesthesia, while I was trusting volunteers to watch my son because I had no available child care, while I was performing a surgery that would decide whether a man lived into the new year, they were posing for photos with a dog in a boutique spa. Not just any dog. Brooke's dog. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the pieces fall into place at their own pace. They had not been unavailable. They had not been overwhelmed. They had not been unable to help. They had chosen something else. Someone else. A dog. It is strange what the mind does when the truth finally aligns. There is no dramatic shock, no cinematic shattering. There is only the quiet descent of understanding, like snow settling on a surface that was already cold. I opened my eyes, exhaled, and tapped my dad's contact. He picked up on the third ring. "What is it?" he said. His tone was not concerned. It was weary, as if I were interrupting something delicate or inconvenient. For a moment, I wondered if he already knew why I was calling, or if he was simply bracing for utter habit. The way people do when they expect responsibility to land on their shoulders. I kept my voice even. I saw Brooke's story. There was a pause, brief but dense. Then he cleared his throat. "Your mom and I were helping her this morning," he said. "She had plans. Big day for her." "Big day," I repeated softly. His voice picked up speed, as if he feared silence more than confrontation. "She needed someone to take the dog in. You know how anxious that dog gets, and your mom is good with him. He trusts her. A dog trusts her." The unspoken comparison stayed lodged in my throat. He continued quickly. "And Brooke had a reservation at that place. They charge you if you cancel at the last minute. You know how these things work. I said nothing. I let the quiet stretch, not to punish him, but because I had nothing to fill it with. Your mom tried calling you, he added, a note of defensiveness creeping in. She said she left a message. You did not answer either. I thought of the single voicemail from her, the practiced concern in her tone, the quick pivot to the new grill she wanted. I thought of the word seen under my message the night before. I thought of the scrub sink, the cold feeling of stainless steel under my palms, the ache of my son's weight as I carried him to the hospital play area. I thought of a dog wearing a bow. He pushed on. You were already at the hospital. You said you were fine. You always handle things. You know that. There it was, the line, the familiar refrain. You always handle things. I swallowed the metallic taste in my mouth. I needed help last night. Another long pause. Well, you managed, did you not? He said. It came out too quickly, too neatly, like something he had said before. Maybe to himself, maybe to Brooke, maybe to justify something he already knew was wrong. Did you think to ask about your grandson? I said. The silence on his end was sharp, a shape I could almost hear. I continued before he could form a response. He slept at the hospital, in a play area, because I had no one to watch him, because you told me you were busy, because you said you could not help me. His inhale was audible through the phone, a small, startled sound, as if he had not expected the truth to be said aloud. I am sorry you were stressed, he murmured, but Brooke needed us. You know she's very sensitive. And her dog? Well, he is like family to her. Family. The word hit harder than anything else. I let the air settle. I did not argue. I did not explain. I did not correct him, or remind him, or outline the reality he refused to see. Instead, I said the simplest thing. I understand. He exhaled, relieved, mistaking my calm for agreement rather than clarity. Good, good, I knew you would. I did not answer that. He hesitated, then added, Your mom will call later. She wants to check on you. On me, not on my son. All right, I said. My voice was steady. Too steady. He hung up with a quick goodbye, the kind people offer when they believe a matter is resolved. I remained seated at the kitchen table, phone resting in my open palm, morning light brightening the room inch by inch. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. My son stirred faintly in his room, turning over in his sleep, and I felt it again. That quiet descent. Not anger, not yet. Not grief, recognition. I had always heard that people show you their priorities, not through words, but through choices, through where they place their time, their effort, their care. And last night, my parents placed theirs in a grooming salon, holding a dog with a ribbon around its neck, smiling for a camera while I stood under the harsh lights of an operating room, navigating the inside of a human heart with hands that had not stopped trembling from something I could not name. I placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time in a long time, I did not reach for a solution, did not try to soften the blow, or make sense of it, or rearrange myself to fit what they needed. I let the silence settle. Not the kind they used as avoidance. My silence had weight, shape, intention. It was the beginning of a boundary, and I sat with it until the room felt still again. I sat there long enough for the sunlight to shift across the table, warming a spot on my forearm while the rest of me stayed cold. The quiet had weight, a kind of gravity pulling old memories out of their corners, and I let them surface because for once I was not rushing to put out a fire someone else had started. It struck me then, in a way it never had before, how familiar this posture was. Shoulders braced, breath held, waiting for the next responsibility to fall into my hands, waiting to be needed, not because anyone asked gently, but because the expectation had always been there, woven so tightly into family life that I did not see it until I stopped moving long enough to look. Growing up, I had been the one who figured things out. The ride home nobody planned. The bill nobody remembered. The application deadline everyone ignored until the last possible moment. I was the one who handled it, smoothed it, absorbed it. And every time I did, my dad would give a satisfied nod, the kind that said, "See? She is reliable." My mom would pat my arm lightly and say something like, "We did not even have to tell you." You always know what to do. I used to hear pride in her voice. Maybe that was true then, or maybe it was convenience dressed as praise. I can see that now. And Brooke, my younger sister, filled a different space entirely. She had always been described as sensitive, which in our family meant that any discomfort she felt had to be managed immediately. If she was upset, the whole house shifted to accommodate it. If she wanted something, the question was never whether she needed it, but who could get it for her. She was very good at being present in ways that photographed well. Holiday photos, birthday photos, family brunch photos. She smiled easily, leaned toward whichever parent was closest, rested her head gently on someone's shoulder for the camera. My mom would beam at her, and my dad would slip an arm around her as if she were made of spun glass. Being delicate was part of her charm, and protecting that charm was apparently a full-time family project. I thought about the New Year's dinner, the way Brooke had glided into the room in her pale sweater, dog tucked under one arm like an accessory. She had taken pictures of the table, of the fireplace, of my mom lighting candles. Then she had arranged the dog in front of the couch for another photo. All of that sweetness, all of that softness. And yet when I had asked for help, she had lowered her eyes and stayed silent. Not out of malice, out of habit. Protecting her comfort had always come first. I leaned back in my chair, letting these realizations stack themselves like files I had avoided opening. Somewhere along the way, without any formal assignment, I had been cast in the role of the one who could take care of herself, the one who did not need anything, the one who would manage, regardless of circumstance. A self-sustaining system. My mom used to say it with a light laugh. You are our steady one, so capable. You do not need us the way Brooke does. At the time, it sounded like a compliment, a recognition of strength. But now, in this still kitchen, with the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, it landed differently. It sounded more like an exemption, like I had been quietly removed from the category of people deserving care. Care was reserved for the fragile one, the sensitive one, the one who needed cushioning from the world. And I, the dependable daughter, had become the cushion. A memory flickered up, unexpected. I was 16. Sitting at the dining table with my mom, filling out scholarship forms while she looked through a catalog for Brooke's new dance costumes. She barely glanced at what I was doing, and I remember asking her if she wanted to see the essay I had written. She smiled without looking up. You are good with money. You do not need my input. I trust you. I felt proud then, trusted, independent. Now, replaying it with adult eyes, I could hear what she really meant. Your needs are yours to handle. Brooke's are ours. It was strange how these old conversations gained new shape in the light of last night's rejection. Patterns that once felt invisible now stood in sharp relief. Another memory surfaced. I had come over, done it quickly, and he had said, almost absent-mindedly, "You never make things complicated. You just get it done." If only Brooke could be like you, and why they did not think twice about not leaning on me when I needed something. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. My chest felt tight, not with grief, but with clarity. This was not about last night alone, not about a dog or a grooming salon or a single scene message. This was about years of being the reliable one, the sturdy one, the one who did not require emotional oxygen. Parents do not always love equally, but they do prioritize differently. I had never wanted favoritism. I only wanted reciprocity. And last night showed me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of needs. My phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder for a follow-up appointment I needed to confirm. I reached for it, then paused as another sound rose through the quiet. My son shifted in his room, small feet hitting the floor as he padded toward the hallway, the soft tap against the wall as he steadied himself. He walked in with his hair sticking up on one side, rubbing his eyes with a fist. "In the morning," he mumbled, climbing into my lap without a second thought. I wrapped an arm around him and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. This child, this small, warm weight against me, was the one person in the world who saw me without definition or expectation. I was not the reliable one, or the steady one, or the daughter who could manage on her own. I was just his mother, his safe place, his constant. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized how much of myself I had given away to roles that had never belonged to me. He leaned against me while I opened a carton of yogurt for him and set him up with breakfast. He hummed to himself as he ate, swinging his legs under the table. I watched him, letting the simple sight of him steady the tornado in my mind. I stood and walked to my desk in the corner of the kitchen. My laptop sat there, half buried under case notes and schedule charts. I moved them aside and opened the computer. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. If I wanted to understand the dynamic fully, I needed to see the whole picture. Not emotionally, practically, strategically. I had played the role of the dependable daughter without ever stepping back to assess what that role cost me, or how deeply it shaped the way my parents behaved. I could not change the past, but I could reclaim control over the present. I logged into the accounts tied to my family, the ones that had been set up over the years out of convenience or practicality, or because I was the one who knew how to handle it. My name was everywhere, scattered across profiles and authorizations like little sticky notes of obligation. A familiar voice echoed in my mind, soft but sharp. My mom, years ago, patting my hand lightly and saying with that proud smile, "You are so good at making money, sweetheart." It had been meant as praise. It had also been a sentence, a definition, a reason they believed they could lean forever without noticing the weight of what they asked for. I inhaled slowly, letting the old words lose their grip. Then I began the process, one login at a time, one page at a time, one long overlooked detail at a time. My son hummed at the table. The refrigerator clicked on. Sunlight brightened the kitchen tile, and I took the first real step toward rewriting the role I had been given without ever agreeing to play it. I opened the first account with the same steadiness I bring into an operating room. Slow breath in, slow breath out. Eyes fixed on the information in front of me. No assumptions, no emotion. Just observation. That mindset has saved more than one life. I figured it could save mine too, or at least whatever remained of my peace. The joint credit card sat near the top of the list. I had opened it back in 2018 because my dad had been having trouble with online banking, and my mom had told me it would just be easier if I handled it. Easier had always been the bait in my family. Responsibility was the hook, and I had always bitten cleanly. I clicked into the current monthly statement, expecting the usual handful of charges I had allowed myself to believe were harmless. Maybe a grocery run, maybe a dinner out, maybe something they forgot to mention. Something reasonable, something that would let me believe this situation, messy as it was, still lived within boundaries. Instead, the page filled with transactions that did not belong to me, or even to the version of my parents I had tried to hold on to. $270 at a boutique steakhouse downtown. $300 at a home store known for overpriced accent pieces. $450 at a spa. I knew my mom had never stepped foot inside. I scrolled further. The charges continued. An unbroken stream of restaurants, specialty shops, luxury items. Then I saw the purse, a designer brand my mom admired, one she had commented on for years but claimed she would never waste money on. Except apparently she had. And she had charged it to the card tied to my name. My throat tightened, not from surprise, but from the slow, creeping recognition that spreads the way a shadow moves under a door. These were not mistakes. These were not emergencies. These were not the kind of purchases people justify by saying life got the better of them. These were indulgences, consistent ones. I scrolled back month by month, reading the pattern the way I would read an EKG. The rhythm was unmistakable. The baseline was clear. Then I reached the line that made my breath stop for a moment. Rent, the same amount every month. $2,400, paid without interruption for 3 years. I stared at the number. My vision narrowed around it, almost surgical in its precision, the way my focus sharpens when I am closing an arterial line that demands absolute steadiness. $2,400, every month, for 3 years, for Brooke. My hands loosened from the trackpad. I leaned back slightly, letting my shoulders settle. There was no outburst, no sound, only the faint echo of my own pulse in my ears, the soft ringing that comes when the truth rearranges the room around you. It was not the amount that cut deepest. It was the certainty that no one had ever planned to tell me. This was not a one-time crisis. This was not a temporary lifeline. This was structure. Built around me, built on me. I clicked deeper into the history, scrolling through older statements. The charges filled the screen in long, uninterrupted lists. Dining, clothing, gifts, more rent, even grooming for Brooke's dog, the same dog they had chosen over my son the night before. The total did not require a calculator. My mind had already begun stitching the numbers together with the kind of detached arithmetic I bring into complex surgical procedures. I did not need to see the exact figure to understand the truth. The betrayal had been cumulative, layered, routine. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting my breath settle again. There was no panic in my body, no trembling, just a slow, heavy understanding that something foundational had cracked long before I noticed. The break. This was not an accident. This was a pattern. I opened my eyes and scrolled all the way back to the earliest statement in 2018. There it was, the first rent payment. Smaller then, because the building had been cheaper at the time, but the principle had been the same. They had decided what my role would be, and then they had built their lives around that decision. My phone buzzed on the counter behind me. I did not turn around. I needed clarity before the conversation. I needed facts before feelings. Feelings had misled me for years. Numbers had never done that. I opened a fresh note on my computer and began typing. Not a journal entry, a list, a surgical plan, step by step. What accounts were in my name? Which ones I had allowed to drift into family use out of habit? What responsibilities I had taken on without conscious agreement? What authorizations needed to be revoked? At the bottom, I typed one sentence: I am not their bank. Seeing it written was like palpating a pulse that had been faint for years and finally finding it strong. The truth has a temperature. This one was cold, clean, steady. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the contact for Thomas Klein, the attorney who had reviewed the refinancing documents for my townhouse years earlier. Thomas was not warm, which made him perfect for moments like this. Warmth leads to rationalization. I needed precision. I put the call on speaker and walked to the sink. Out of reflex, I rinsed my hands, the way I do before entering an operating room. It was an unnecessary gesture here in my kitchen, but the familiar sound of running water steadied me. He answered after the third ring, saying my name with the clipped efficiency of a man who had already opened a file, in his mind. He asked what I needed, expecting something routine, probably a tax form or a question about a refinancing timeline. I explained everything, simply, without emotion. I did not tell him about the New Year's humiliation, or the dog spa, or the silence in the family group chat. I did not tell him how long I had been the reliable one, or how deeply the expectation had woven itself into the fabric of my family. I told him only what mattered legally: a joint credit card, unauthorized charges, my name on accounts used for expenses that were not mine, years of financial support without consent, a pattern of reliance built without agreement. He listened, occasionally humming in acknowledgement as he typed. When he finally spoke, his voice was as even as an anesthetic monitor. He told me I had no obligation to continue paying for any adult family member, unless a formal agreement existed. There was none. He told me my authorization on the card did not make me responsible for charges incurred without my consent. He told me I had the right to terminate access immediately and revoke any link between my credit history and their expenses. He outlined the steps clearly. Contact the bank. Remove myself as guarantor. Close unused accounts. Freeze any card tied to my name. Document everything. Keep copies in case the situation escalates. No jargon, no lectures, just structure. Structure. I knew how to follow the structure. Then, before ending the call, he said something I did not expect. Something quiet, spoken almost as an afterthought. People take advantage of the reliable ones. Make sure you protect yourself. His words landed like a final diagnosis. Not fatal, not surprising. Just confirmed. The line went silent. I stayed where I stood for several seconds, palms resting lightly on the countertop. The kitchen was bright now. Morning light stretched across the floor in long, faint stripes. It made the room look cleaner than it felt. There it was. The shift. The moment clarity turned into action. I walked back to the computer and began the process step by step. Removing authorizations. closing accounts, changing passwords, deleting automatic payments, cutting the ties that had been disguised as family connection, but were, in truth, financial dependency. Every click felt like a stitch closing a wound I had not realized was still open. The kind of wound that bleeds slowly, quietly, over years. This was not anger. This was not revenge. This was not grief. This was the boundary. And the boundary, I learned at that moment, was not loud. It did not announce itself or demand to be acknowledged. It did not slam doors or raise voices. It aligned the truth with the necessary action, and then it held steady. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair and looked at the screen one last time. The accounts were clean now, organized, contained. I could see the edges of my own financial life again, no longer blurred by my family's unspoken expectations. Whatever came next would not be based on guilt or obligation or confusion. This was no longer about feelings. This was about a line I should have drawn years ago. A line I was finally ready to hold. I did not sleep much that night. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles after a long shift in the operating room, when the adrenaline has drained but the mind has not caught up yet. My son was asleep in his room, breathing in soft, predictable rhythms. I envied that steadiness, the way children can surrender to rest without rehearsing the past. I stayed at the kitchen table, staring at the cooling mug of tea I had made hours earlier. My phone sat face down beside it. I did not need to check it to know the silence from my family was still there, holding its shape like something heavy. By morning, clarity had sharpened itself. I was not angry in the way people imagine anger sounds. There was no heat in it, no tremor in my hands. It was the kind of anger born from realization, the quiet kind that comes with the understanding that a pattern had been hiding in plain sight. My son padded into the kitchen, hair messy, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. I helped him climb onto a chair and set cereal in front of him, watching him eat with the single-minded focus only children have at that hour. I felt the faintest pull in my chest, the reminder of who I needed to protect now, and who I no longer needed to explain myself to. After breakfast, I drove us both to a follow-up appointment for a patient, dropping my son off at the child care center near the hospital where I knew he would be safe for a few hours. I told myself the routine would steady me. It usually did. It did not. Not entirely. By the time I returned home, I knew I had one thing left to do. Not a speech, not a confrontation, not a plea. Just a message. One message. Enough to let the truth speak without me dressing it in emotion. I sat at the dining table again, sunlight pooling across the wood. I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. The same chat that had been filled with holiday photos and updates from cousins and reminders about birthdays. The same chat where my silence after New Year's dinner had already sparked questions I had no intention of answering individually. I typed slowly, deliberately. Not one extra word, no dramatic phrasing, no attempt to soften or provoke, just facts. I wrote that I had been called into the hospital for a cardiac emergency. I wrote that I had needed someone to watch my son for a few hours, and that my dad and mom had declined. I wrote that instead they had gone to Brooke's house to take her dog to a grooming appointment, something I had learned only because she posted it publicly. I attached 2 photos. The first was the screenshot of the story Brooke had posted, the dog wrapped in a towel, the caption calling my parents the best dog grandparents ever. The second was a cropped section of the credit card statement that showed one of the rent payments. I did not add commentary. I did not circle anything. I did not send a paragraph of frustration. I wrote only this at the end. This is the truth. I am stepping back. Then I pressed send. The bubble turned blue. The moment stretched. It was done. Almost immediately, reactions appeared. The little flurry of icons that meant someone was reading. Then more. Then the pings began. Short at first, like hesitant footsteps. Then rapid. I turned the phone over again so the screen faced down. I stood up and walked to the sink, rinsing out my mug. My hands moved in practiced motions, muscle memory from mornings that had looked almost identical, except the air felt lighter now. Lighter in a way that made me wonder whether the heaviness I had been living with had started long before New Year's dinner. A few minutes later, the phone began vibrating against the wood in a steady rhythm. I did not need to look. I could imagine exactly what the messages said. Exclamations, questions, demands for clarification, attempts to smooth things over, attempts to redirect, attempts to tell me what I should feel. But then it rang. A call this time. I let it ring out. Then another. I poured water into a pot and set it on the stove, deciding to make soup even though I was not hungry. The movement kept me anchored while the storm gathered on the device behind me. When the ringing finally stopped, I turned the phone over. There were missed calls from 2 aunts, both of whom have always believed themselves to be mediators. There were messages from cousins expressing confusion. There were short bursts of disbelief. And then there were the longer ones, the ones written by the relatives who had spent enough years observing my parents to know exactly how plausible my message was. It was the message from Elaine that stopped me in place. Elaine is my mom's cousin, older by almost 15 years. Practical, sharp, known for cutting through noise with sentences that feel like clean incisions. She never comments in the family chat unless she considers it necessary. Her name appearing in the thread was its own occasion. Her message was simple. I am proud of you for finally stepping back. They have leaned on you too long. There was no softness in it, no emojis, no diplomatic cushioning. Just acknowledgement. More responses followed her message, some agreeing, some trying to shift the focus, some defending my parents with lines I had heard versions of for years. They mean well. They do so much. It was just one moment. You know how Brooke is. They were just helping. I sat back down at the table and rested my fingertips lightly on the phone, not opening the chat again. The messages kept coming. The conversation inside the family was now running on its own momentum. It did not require me. It never had. The phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. A call. My dad's name on the screen. I let it ring until it went silent. Not out of spite, out of protection. When someone has shown you their priorities, your job is not to argue with them. Your job is to accept what they have revealed and adjust accordingly. The truth had already done its work. No dialogue needed to follow. I turned the phone face down again just as the vibration started once more. My mom's name this time. I let that one ring out as well. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. The day was calm. Ordinary. A woman walked her dog past the house, bundled against the cold. A delivery driver placed a package on a porch across from mine. Life continues without interruption. That contrast used to unsettle me, the way normalcy could coexist with emotional upheaval. Now it soothed me. It reminded me that what felt seismic inside a family can be entirely contained outside of it. I went back to the stove, stirred the pot, tasted the broth, and adjusted the seasoning. My hands moved without thought. The simple, grounding act of cooking reminded me that my life had a structure beyond the chaos of obligation. The phone began vibrating again, this time with a different rhythm. Multiple calls in succession. My parents are trying, together now. Dad first, then Mom, then both at the same time, then Brooke, which made me exhale a short, humorless sound that might have been a laugh if there had been anything funny about any of this. None of the attempts reached me. My boundary had been quiet until now, invisible, unspoken. Today it had taken the shape of a single message and a turned-over phone. My son came into the kitchen, holding his stuffed bear by one arm, eyes still puffy from his nap. He leaned against my leg, warm and small and unburdened. I lifted him onto my hip and felt my shoulders loosen in a way I had not noticed. They had tensed. We sat together at the table while he pointed out shapes in the steam rising from the pot. I answered his questions softly, grateful for the simplicity of them. A little while later, when the pot was cooling and afternoon light had begun to soften, I picked up the phone again, not to engage, not to explain, just to make sure no emergency had slipped in among the chaos. There was nothing urgent, nothing life-threatening, nothing that required my intervention, just family reacting to the first real boundary I had ever drawn. I set the phone down one final time, screen dark. That was enough. One message had been enough. The truth was already moving through the family, shaping itself into consequences that did not belong to me. I felt no urge to correct or guide or soothe. For the first time in years, I was not stepping into the predictable role of interpreter, fixer, or emotional buffer. I stood, lifted my son into my arms, and walked into the living room, turning on a soft lamp as the sky dimmed. The house felt like a safe place again, like a space that belonged to us instead of an extension of responsibilities that were never properly mine. The phone was still buzzing faintly in the kitchen behind me. I did not go back for it. They had seen the message. They had chosen silence when I needed them. I was choosing silence now. And in that silence, something in me finally settled into place. The moment I finished adjusting the last account, the house felt different. Not louder or quieter, just clearer. The way a room feels after you finally remove a piece of furniture that never belonged there. The absence creates its own kind of space. My son was sitting on the living room rug building towers from blocks and knocking them over with the sort of laughter that comes from having no idea that a parent just rewired the entire flow of family history. I envied that simplicity. Children accept endings and beginnings as if they have always known the world will rearrange itself. Adults resist that same truth with everything they have. I walked to the table where my laptop still sat open and read through the list. Again. The transfer was canceled. The credit card was frozen. The car lease termination was in motion. These were not small adjustments. They were the backbone of the system my family had come to depend on. Before doing anything else, I closed the laptop and placed my hand flat on top of it for a moment. It felt symbolic, like sealing something shut. Not out of anger, out of finality. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated with a notification. I ignored it. Then it vibrated again. Then again. I still ignored it. I stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup I had started absent-mindedly, letting the ordinary rhythm of cooking steady me. But then the phone began ringing, not politely, not casually, urgently. The first call was from my dad. The ringtone cut sharply through the kitchen, like a reminder of a life I was stepping out of. I let it ring until it went silent. I turned off the stove, picked up the phone, and stared at the missed call notification. Before I could set it down again, it rang a second time. I answered, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to witness the shift that was coming. My dad's voice came through tight and agitated. He did not greet me. He said the card had been declined. He said the transfer had not gone through. He said the car company had called him about something he did not understand. His tone carried outrage more than confusion, as if some natural law had failed. It occurred to me that for him, it truly had. I let him speak until the rush of his anger began circling the same point. When he finally paused, I spoke with the same tone he had used at the dinner table on New Year's Eve, when he dismissed my request for a small favor while accepting my large contributions without thought. You said I was not your responsibility, so I stopped acting like I was your bank. Silence dropped across the line so completely that I thought the call had disconnected. But then I heard his breath, uneven, startled, like someone realizing the ground beneath him was not as solid as he had believed. He said I was overreacting. He said families help each other. He said this was a shock. He said he needed time to adjust. He said a lot of things that had nothing to do with the truth. The truth was simple. The arrangement had worked only because I had carried the weight without naming it. The moment I named it, the arrangement collapsed under its own imbalance. I ended the call before he could gather his arguments into something sharper. Not even a full minute passed before the phone rang again. This time, it was my mom. I let it ring once before answering because I needed to adjust my breath, the same way I prepare myself before walking into a difficult consultation at the Dringus Hospital. Her voice was already breaking when she said my name. She asked how I could do this. She asked why I would cut them off without warning. She asked if I understood the pressure they were under. She asked so many questions that were not questions at all. They were invitations to return to the role I had finally put down. I listened, not because I felt obligated, but because I needed to hear it clearly. Every guilt-soaked phrase, every practice tremor, every insistence that I had acted too harshly, too quickly, too decisively. I asked her the only question that mattered. Why did you not watch your grandson when I was called into the hospital? I waited. My hands rested against the counter, steady, patient. She inhaled slowly, the way people do when they are searching for something they know does not exist. She offered excuses. She said they had made plans. She said Brooke needed help. She said they assumed I would figure something out. Assume. The word held more weight than she intended. I asked again, "Why did you not watch your grandson?" She did not answer the second time, and in that silence, the shape of everything became clear. My support had never been an expression of love to them. It had been a resource, and resources were expected to function on demand. She asked for just one more month, for Brooke's sake, for their stability, for the family. One more month was how this had all begun, and one more month was how it would have continued for the rest of my life if I let it. I told her no, calmly, quietly, with a firmness I had not known I possessed. She cried harder. I ended the call gently. The third call came from Brooke. There was no prelude. She launched straight into the accusation. She said I had humiliated her. She said she could not believe what I had done. She said she needed the money. She said her rent was due. She said she was already stressed. Every sentence she spoke began with I. I listened long enough to understand the tone, but not long enough to absorb the guilt. When she finally paused to breathe, I said only one thing. "You will figure it out." Then I hung up. The silence that followed was not silence. My phone lit up over and over with missed calls and messages arriving faster than I could count. I turned it face down again. Whatever panic they were experiencing belonged to them, not to me. My son wandered into the kitchen holding his stuffed bear. He lifted his arms toward me, and I picked him up. He rested his head on my shoulder, still warm from his nap. He had no idea that 3 grown adults were spiraling because of their financial ladder had been pulled away. He had no idea that I had spent years holding that ladder in place. I kissed the top of his head and carried him into the living room. The sun was starting to dip, casting soft gold over the furniture. He settled beside me on the couch and wrapped a blanket around himself before drifting back to sleep. I watched him breathe, steady and trusting, and realized something I had never admitted aloud. All the money I had poured into my family had cost me time, energy, sleep, peace. But the real price had been paid by my son. He had received the version of me left over after everyone else had taken what they wanted. Not anymore. In the quiet of that room, with my son curled against me and my phone buzzing uselessly on the kitchen counter, I realized that this moment was not about punishment or revenge. It was about alignment. Restoring things to their rightful places. Children come first. Boundaries come next. Everything else must arrange itself accordingly. I stayed there until the sky turned a darker shade of blue. The calls slowed. The messages stopped arriving in clusters and began trickling in one at a time, each one a little softer, as if the panic had worn itself out. Eventually, the phone stopped vibrating altogether. I walked into the kitchen to turn off the stove. The pot of soup had cooled. The room smelled faintly of vegetables and rosemary. My life smelled like itself again, not like obligation. I looked at the phone but did not reach for it. I picked up my son instead, still wrapped in his blanket, and carried him upstairs to bed. He stirred only once before settling into sleep again. When I returned to the kitchen, the house felt impossibly still. The bank had closed. Their reaction had landed where it belonged, and in the center of that quiet stood a version of myself I had not met before. A woman who could say no without apology. A woman who understood that love without limits becomes something distorted. I sat at the table with the lights dimmed, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to repair, nothing left to undo. The night stretched around me, gentle and steady. My son slept upstairs, the kitchen, I woke early the next morning, long before my son did, long before the sun even considered rising. The house was still dark and soft around the edges, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, watching the sky shift from deep blue to pale gray, letting the warmth of the mug settle the last of the tension in my shoulders. For a few minutes, everything felt steady, simple, mine. By mid-morning, that quiet broke. I heard the knock before I saw the car in the driveway. It had the familiar rhythm of people who believed they had a right to show up, unannounced. My breath stilled in my chest. I set my mug down and walked to the door. My dad stood on the porch with my mom beside him. Both looked smaller than I remembered from childhood, and yet somehow heavier, as if carrying their own disbelief like a weight they could not distribute. I opened the door just far enough that they could step inside if I let them. They did not wait for the invitation. They crossed the threshold with the rushed urgency of people who had rehearsed something in the car and were afraid to lose their momentum. My mom spoke first. Her voice trembled with hurt and accusation entwined so tightly that it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. She said I had wounded them. She said what I had done was cruel. She said she did not recognize the person standing in front of her. My dad added to it, sharper, harsher. He called me heartless. Saeed shedding off the money without warning had put them in an impossible position. Said no child should treat their parents that way. Said he never expected this from me. I listened because silence was the only thing that kept the room from fracturing. Their words washed over me in waves, familiar in tone, if not in content. The righteousness, the certainty, the belief that their version of the story was the only one that mattered. When they finally paused, waiting for me to apologize, to reverse everything, I asked the only question that cut through all the noise. Why did you not watch your grandson when I was called into the hospital? My dad blinked as if the question had come from a language he did not speak. My mom looked at the floor. Neither of them said anything. I waited. My dad cleared his throat and said they had plans that night. My mom said Brooke needed help. My dad added that it had been a holiday and they were tired. My mom said they did not think it was a big deal. My dad said they assumed I could find someone else, that I always managed somehow. Assumed. Always. The words landed softly but pierced all the same. I repeated the question slower this time. Why did you not watch your grandson? Again. No answer that meant anything. Only excuses shifting like sand beneath their own feet. None of them acknowledged the truth at the center of it. They chose not to help. They chose not to show up. They chose their comfort over a child who needed them. Their silence said more than their words ever could. My mom finally lifted her head, eyes wet but focused. She said they had talked about it and wanted to propose something reasonable. Just one more month. Just until Brooke got back on her feet. Just until things settled. Just until they could adjust. One more month. I felt something inside me settle with absolute clarity. One more month was not a bridge. It was a loop, a path that curved back into the same pattern. One more month would become 2, then 6, then another year, then another crisis. Then another excuse. They were not asking for time. They were asking for access. They were asking for a return to the system that benefited them at the cost of me. I told them no. My voice was quiet but complete. It did not shake. It did not waver. It did not apologize. My mom's breath caught, and she stepped toward me, reaching in that familiar way she used to when she wanted to soften me. I stepped slightly back, not abruptly, but enough that the message carried without volume. She froze. My dad's face tightened, anger flaring before he tried to smother it with disappointment. He said I was throwing away decades of family unity. He said people would judge me. He said he did not understand how I could be so ungrateful. Ungrateful. The word floated between us like a lit match in a dry field. I looked at him steadily, not with anger, not with bitterness, with truth. You made it clear at dinner. You said you were not my responsibility. I am honoring that. His jaw worked as if trying to form a reply and failing. My mom tried again. She said I was doing something irreversible, that someday I would regret it, that family was family no matter what. She said they did their best. She said they never meant to hurt me. She said I was taking everything too personally. It took me a moment to recognize what she meant by everything. Everything included the years of silent expectation, the unspoken obligations layered upon one another until they resembled love more than imbalance. Everything included the financial support they had treated like background noise. Everything included the way they placed Brooke's comfort above my son's safety without hesitation. Everything included the belief that I would keep paying because stopping would make me the problem. I let her finish. Then I asked the question again in one sentence, the anchor of the entire confrontation. Why did you not watch your grandson? This time they did not even try to answer, not even a lie to make the moment easier. The truth caught up to them. Not the big truth about money or dependency or entitlement, the smaller truth about choices. And choices always reveal priorities. My dad muttered that they did not come here to be attacked. My mom said she felt unsafe in this conversation. Unsafe, not because of anything happening in the room, but because the system that had protected them for years was dissolving in real time. Neither of them noticed the symmetry. They had felt unsafe for 10 minutes. I had felt unsafe in their expectations for a decade. My mom tried one last angle and said Brooke was falling apart. She said this decision would ruin her. She said it was not fair to punish everyone for one misunderstanding. Just one misunderstanding. The urge to laugh rose and fell inside me, not out of humor, out of recognition. This was the script they always returned to. If they minimized the behavior, they could minimize the consequence. I repeated the truth gently. Brooke is an adult. She will figure it out. They did not like that sentence. I saw it in the way my mom's face tightened and my dad's eyes darted toward the door as if considering escape. I knew then that nothing I said would land differently. They were scrambling to preserve the old order, and I was standing in the doorway of a new one. No bridge connected the two. I stepped back, placing one hand lightly on the edge of the door. The shift in posture was enough. My mom's tears came harder. My dad stared at me as if I were a stranger who had taken his daughter's place. He said I was making a mistake. I said quietly that I hoped someday they would understand. He said I was being cruel. I said I was being clear. They stood there a moment longer, suspended in their own disbelief. Then they walked back across the threshold and out into the cold air. My mom paused once, turning as if she might say something more, but whatever words she considered did not find their way out. The car doors shut. The engine started. They backed out of the driveway slowly, maybe hoping I would come out after them. I did not. When the sound of the car faded, the house returned to its quiet. My son was upstairs napping, unaware of the emotional storm that had just passed through. I walked into the living room and sat at the edge of the couch, feeling neither triumphant nor devastated. Just steady. That was the thing no one tells you about boundaries. They do not explode. They settle. Like dust after a long construction project, like your lungs after a long-held breath. I stood and walked back into the kitchen, placing my hand on the table the same way I had the night before. The wood felt smooth under my palm, familiar in a way my family no longer did. Whatever happened next would unfold without me being the one to sacrifice for it. Whatever consequences came, they would belong to the decisions that created them. I whispered it aloud, not as a threat, not as a defense, but as a truth finally spoken in its full shape. This is the line. The house was still. My son slept peacefully upstairs, and for the first time, I felt the strength of a boundary held without apology. Time did not rush forward after my parents left my house that day. It did not lurch or collapse. It stretched, slow and even, like a road unfolding beneath steady footsteps. Weeks passed with a quiet rhythm I had almost forgotten existed. Work, home, my son's laughter, the soft creak of the stairs at night, the small rituals that had nothing to do with obligation or debt. Life went on, and so did theirs. I did not check in, but pieces of information found me anyway. Families have a way of letting news travel, even when conversations have stopped. Comments filtered through cousins or old neighbors, people who meant well or simply liked passing along what they knew. At first, the changes were subtle. My parents stopped going out to dinner as often. They skipped a friend's birthday dinner because the restaurant was too pricey. My mom began clipping coupons again, something she had not done in years. My dad postponed a maintenance project he had been planning for the backyard. None of it is dramatic, just shifts around the edges. Then came larger adjustments. Their second car disappeared from the driveway. I heard it was sold to a colleague of my dad's, someone who had admired it for years. It was not a luxury car, but it was the one they used for weekend trips and outings with friends. Without it, their social life shrank. They attended fewer gatherings, stayed home more, offered rain checks they never followed through on. I did not celebrate these changes. I did not relish them. They were consequences unfurling in predictable pattern. When a support beam disappears, the structure adjusts whether it wants to or not. Brooke's life shifted too. She went quiet on social media for a while, which was unusual for her. No pictures of her dinners, No curated posts about her routines. No carefully posed snapshots with captions about gratitude and manifestation. Eventually, the updates returned, but they were different. A picture of a coffee cup at dawn with a caption about early mornings. A selfie taken in a fitting room with a name tag clipped to her shirt. She had taken a retail job at a clothing store not far from where she lived. I checked the location once by accident when I tapped too quickly on her profile. Retail was honest work. Hard work. Work that demanded patience most people never acknowledged. Work that did not leave room for midday spa appointments. She made a vague post one afternoon about the cost of bills and the unfairness of adulthood. I scrolled past it without interacting. Not because I was unmoved, but because the dynamic that used to pull me in no longer had a hook. She, too, was adjusting to a new structure. The months continued, steady and unremarkable in their pace. My son grew taller. His vocabulary expanded. His laugh grew louder. I found myself breathing easier in small, unnoticed ways. The food tasted better. Sleep came more readily. Even the demands of surgery felt more contained because they were not competing with responsibilities that never belonged to me in the first place. Then, near the end of spring, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, addressed in my dad's looping script that had always been slightly crooked from the way he held his pen. The envelope was plain, no return address, no indications of tone or purpose. I held it for a moment before opening it, sensing the weight of whatever sat inside. Not heavy in pages, but heavy in something else. Recognition, maybe. Consequence. Reflection. The paper inside was a single sheet, folded twice. His handwriting filled the page unevenly, as if he had started and stopped several times while composing it. He began by saying he hoped I was well. He mentioned my son briefly, hoping he was healthy and growing. Then he shifted into something more uncertain, a tone that did not resemble the man who had stood in my kitchen accusing me of cruelty. He wrote that he had been thinking a lot about our conversation. He said he did not like how it had ended. He said he wished emotions had not been so high. He said he never intended to make me feel unappreciated. Then he wrote a sentence that sat heavier than all the rest. I saw the money you gave as something you were supposed to do because you were in a better position than the rest of us. I read the sentence twice, 3 times, slowly. It was not an apology. Not exactly. It was not even an admission of wrongdoing, at least not in the way people usually offer it. It was an acknowledgement of belief, a belief he had held quietly, comfortably, for years. A belief that had shaped so many decisions I never even knew were being made. Supposed to. That was the phrase at the center of it. Supposed to implied obligation. Supposed to implied hierarchy. Supposedly implied that the arrangement had not only been acceptable to him, but natural. I leaned back in my chair, letting the paper rest lightly in my hand. I felt no anger rising, no fresh hurt, no swelling of vindication, only a soft release, like an exhale held too long. There it was, the truth that had been buried beneath years of unspoken expectations, a truth that explained everything that had happened and everything they had asked of me. Not because they were malicious, not because they wanted to harm me, but because they had lived so long inside a system where my reliability eclipsed my personhood. He finished by saying he hoped time would soften things. He hoped I would remember the good years. He hoped the distance would not last forever. That was all. I folded the letter back along its original creases and placed it gently on the table. It sat there in the afternoon light, thin and unassuming, holding within it the quiet confession of a man who had only just begun to understand the shape of his own expectations. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not analyze the words beyond what they already offered. I felt lighter, not because he had apologized, but because he had named something that had lived unnamed between us for far too long. Naming does not fix things, but it clarifies them, and clarity is its own kind of relief. I tucked the letter into a drawer, not out of sentiment, but out of respect for what it represented. A shift, a recognition, a moment of honesty that had arrived too late to change the past, but just in time to steady the future. As summer approached, the distance between us settled into something less sharp. We did not speak often. We did not visit. But the absence was no longer a wound. It was a boundary, held without resentment, maintained without effort. My parents adjusted their lifestyle quietly. Fewer outings, simpler routines, quieter days. Their world contracted, not painfully, just naturally, like a tide receding to a level it should have been at all along. Brooke stayed in retail and posted about the long hours, the difficult customers, the unpredictable schedules. Her tone shifted over time from indignation to acceptance. There were no more pictures of luxury items, no more vacation snapshots. Her world was reshaping itself too. I did not step in. I did not interfere. I did not cushion the consequences, not out of spite, but because those consequences belonged to the choices that preceded them. Life, when left alone, has a way of teaching. One evening in late August, I stood outside on the back porch while my son played with a plastic truck in the minute grass. The sky had softened into a gentle orange glow, and the air smelled faintly of cut wood from a neighbor's yard. It was the kind of evening that feels steady enough to hold. As I watched him, I realized the weight I had carried for so long was finally gone. Not because the situation had resolved in some cinematic way, but because I no longer held responsibility for things that were never mine. The cost they paid was not mine to assess. It was not mine to judge. It was not mine to fix. Their lives had narrowed. Mine had opened. And that was enough. When the light dimmed and my son began to yawn, I gathered him in my arms, feeling the warm heft of him settle against my shoulder. We went inside, locking the door behind us with a soft click. The house felt calm, whole, balanced. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, hearing nothing but the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of my Bount. My son's footsteps as he searched for his stuffed dinosaur. There was no triumph in the silence. No bitterness either. Just peace. The kind that comes not from winning, but from releasing. And with that peace came the simple understanding that some losses are not losses at all. Some are openings, some are beginnings. The next chapter of my life waited quietly beyond that stillness, and I was finally ready to step into it. I stepped fully into that quiet, the one that had taken months to grow roots in my home, and let it settle around me. It feels different now. Not like distance, or loss, or cold resolve. More like balance. Like something upright and sturdy inside me had finally clicked into alignment after years of leaning too far in one direction. Life did not become perfect. It became stable. And that was enough. Most mornings began before the sun. The townhouse was still and dim, the air cool against my arms as I made my way into the kitchen. I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and set my notes on the table before, reviewing whatever cases were on the schedule that day. My son shuffled in half awake, hair tangled, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. He would climb into my lap without a word and press his cheek against my shoulder, letting his breathing settle into me while the early news murmured in the buddy background. I used to brace for my phone to buzz during these moments, not the hospital pager. That was always expected. I mean the messages from family, the requests that sounded urgent but were never emergencies, the subtle reminders of obligations I did not remember agreeing to. But now, the phone stayed still, quiet, uninterested in pulling me in opposite directions. I carried that quiet into the hospital, too. Being a heart surgeon requires two kinds of attention. The kind that is razor sharp during the operation itself, and the kind that remains soft and perceptive in the aftermath. For years, I moved between those modes while fighting battles in my personal life that dragged at the edges of my focus. I never compromised a patient's care, but I sometimes compromised myself. I stayed late when I should have slept. I volunteered for extra rotations because I assumed I had to prove something. I took calls in empty stairwells while still wearing my surgical cap, managing family conflicts between rounds. Now the work felt clean again. When I scrubbed in, I was fully there. When I left the operating room and handed off to post-operative care, I exhaled without carrying someone else's weight back home with me. There was a morning not long ago when I finished a particularly complex procedure, the kind that requires absolute stillness of mind, where every decision has a rhythm and every movement carries consequence. When the final stitch was placed and the vitals stabilized, I stepped back and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Clarity. Not adrenaline, not exhaustion, Clarity. It was the same clarity I felt the night of that New Year's dinner when my dad said he was not my nanny. It was the clarity that led me to pull my son's small hand into mine and walk out, without performing the usual dance of explanation and apology. It was the clarity that showed me what had been unseen for too long. I was not abandoning my family. I was refusing to abandon myself. Later that afternoon, I picked up my son from school. He bounded toward me with his backpack half open, a crumpled drawing sticking out the side. He talked the entire drive home about a science experiment with baking soda, eruptions, and how a kid in his class had tried to eat the mixture. I listened, laughing at the right moments, letting my shoulders relax into the simple rhythm of it. We stopped by the grocery store. He insisted on pushing the small kid-sized cart even though it wobbled with every turn. The cashier gave him a sticker. He offered her a plastic dinosaur he carried everywhere in exchange. She pretended to consider it before handing it back and telling him she could never take such a valuable item. His chest puffed with pride. These small things, these tiny threads of daily life, felt brighter now. Not because anything extraordinary had happened, but because I finally had space for them. I still saw my parents occasionally, though never by accident, and never without emotional preparation. We were polite, careful, civil in a way that felt almost practiced. They asked about my son. I answered simply. They mentioned updates about their house, their reduced routines, their quieter schedule. I listened without stepping in. They seemed smaller somehow. Not physically, just softer around the edges, less certain of their footing in the world. My mom avoided eye contact more than she used to. My dad cleared his throat often, as if words kept forming and dissolving before they reached his mouth. We never talked about money. That absence used to feel like a wall. Now it felt like a boundary. Brooke remained the same in some ways and changed in others. Her retail job continued. She complained online about difficult customers, long shifts, early mornings. Some posts carried humor. Some carried fatigue. All of them carried a tone I had not heard from her before. Responsibility. She never directed anything at me. No accusations, no gratitude, no acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Our relationship settled into a kind of distant coexistence, knowing of each other, but no longer orbiting each other. Sometimes people ask whether it hurts, whether I miss the closeness we never actually had, whether I wish things had unfolded differently, whether I long for reconciliation or forgiveness or something cinematic that ties everything back together in a neat, sentimental knot. The truth is simpler. I did not lose my family. I lost a role. I lost the part of myself that believed love was tied to usefulness, that believed being dependable made me worthy, that believed my time and energy were infinitely renewable resources for other people to draw from, that believed family obligation required self-sacrifice even when no one else was, sacrificing anything at all. Letting go of that role felt like shedding a wet, heavy coat I had worn for so long I thought it was my skin. I kept what mattered. I kept my integrity. People rarely talk about integrity as something you can feel. They talk about it as a virtue, an abstract principle, a trait someone either has or lacks. But integrity has texture. It has weight. It has a temperature. Mine felt steady, quiet, like a line drawn without anger but with absolute firmness. I also kept my time. My energy, my ability to show up for my son without resentment or fatigue turning me brittle. I kept mornings that belonged to us and evenings that were not interrupted by someone else's crisis that was not a crisis. I kept the peace of knowing where I ended and others began. One Sunday afternoon not long ago, we went to the park. The weather was cool enough for a light jacket, but warm enough that the grass still smelled sweet. My son chased pigeons with loud confidence, arms stretched wide like he could lift off the ground if he tried hard enough. I sat on a bench with a paper cup of coffee and watched him run without hesitation. His joy was uncomplicated. His needs were simple. He existed inside his small world without debt or expectation. I realized as I sat there that this was the life I had been trying to protect all along. Not the financial balance, not the fairness, not the boundary itself. Peace. The peace that grows when you stop handing pieces of yourself to people who mistake them for obligation. The peace that comes from knowing silence is not weakness. It is wisdom. The peace that allows family to exist in whatever shape it is capable of, without forcing it into a shape that harms you. As the sun sank lower and the shadows stretched long across the grass, my son returned to me, breathless, cheeks pink from running. I caught his hand and we walked home slowly, stepping through patches of golden light. The house greeted us with its familiar stillness. I helped him with his bath, read him a story he barely listened to, and tucked him into bed with his dinosaur beside him. When he finally drifted to sleep, I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the rise and fall of his small chest. Then I walked into the kitchen, leaned both hands on the counter, and let the quiet settle again. Not the tense quiet of conflict, the soft quiet of a life reclaimed. I thought about everything that had happened, the choices they made, the choices I made, the distance that formed, the clarity that followed, the peace that now lived in the spaces where expectation used to sit. The ending was not dramatic. It was not triumphant. It was not bitter. It was honest. And honesty, I have learned, is its own kind of mercy. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.